My brother sent nude edits of me to my boss as a prank, so I pressed charges and ruined his record forever. I'm a 27-year-old woman, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the punchline in my older brother Josh's never-ending comedy routine. He's always been the funny one in the family, the charming, quick-witted guy who could turn any moment into a joke. But the jokes were almost always at my expense. When I was 9, he locked me in a closet and told me our house was haunted. When I was 12, he hacked into my email and sent fake love notes to my crush from my account. Everyone thought it was hilarious. Boys will be boys. Don't be so sensitive. Lighten up, it's just Josh. Even when I cried, even when I begged him to stop, it only got worse as we got older. In high school, he slipped gum into my hair the morning of prom. I had to cut out a whole chunk and spent the evening feeling ugly and self-conscious while he laughed with his friends. In college, he pretended to be one of my exes and sent cruel breakup texts for fun. I lost a serious relationship over that one. No one ever called him out. My parents would just sigh and say, "That's how he shows love." Apparently, love looks a lot like humiliation. I kept trying to rise above it. I focused on my career, moved out, limited contact. I thought if I just distanced myself, he'd grow up and I could finally have peace. But then, just when I thought I'd outrun his cruelty, he found a new way to reach into my life and destroy everything I'd built. This time, it wasn't just some childish prank. It was something darker, vicious, and it happened at the one place I'd fought so hard to earn respect. My job, and the fallout nearly cost me everything. After years of working night shifts, unpaid internships, and swallowing my pride at toxic offices, I finally landed my dream job. Project manager at a global tech firm. Corner office. Great salary. A team that actually respected me. I felt proud, genuinely proud, for the first time in a long time. I'd built this life from scratch. No favors, no shortcuts. Just hustle. When I told my family the news, they clapped. My dad said, "Wow, someone in this house has to pay the bills." Josh just smirked and muttered, "Must have been a diversity hire." I laughed it off, like I always did, but inside, it stung. Josh had been living at home for over a year. No job, no rent, no plans, just sarcasm and video games. Anytime I tried to talk about work, he'd interrupt with dumb jokes. "Oh, do you guys use those synergy buzzwords in real life? Bet you just boss people around in heels all day." It wasn't harmless teasing. It was bitterness dressed as banter. I think it killed him that I was finally succeeding, without him. Still, I tried to keep the peace. I kept my updates short when I visited. I didn't brag. I didn't gloat. I just wanted to be seen as someone who'd made it, and maybe for once be taken seriously in my own family. Then one weekend I had to work remotely from home. Big client pitch on Monday. I was laser-focused. Slides, data sheets, everything timed perfectly. Josh kept hovering, pacing behind me, making dumb noises, throwing paper clips at my chair. I told him to knock it off. He just grinned. "Don't get your pencil skirt in a twist. I should have known something was off." That weird glint in his eye, the kind he used to get right before one of his so-called pranks. But I was too busy trying to prove myself at work to notice the trap being set behind me, and by the time I found out what he'd done, it was already too late. It was a Monday morning, gray, cold, forgettable, until it wasn't. I had just poured my coffee and barely logged into my email when I saw the subject line, "Is this your employee?" It came from an anonymous account. No name, no message, just a series of attached images. I clicked. And then I couldn't breathe. It was me. My face, my body, or at least it looked like me. The photos were graphic, nude, obscene. But something was off. The skin tone didn't match exactly, the lighting was wrong, and the poses weren't natural. My head had been digitally pasted onto someone else's body, badly, sloppily. But if you weren't looking for it, if you wanted to believe it was real, you could. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was stare. My hands shook. My coffee spilled across my desk. I scrambled to close the browser, but it was too late. My manager, Rachel, was already standing in my doorway. She didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me with this tight, unreadable expression. "We need to talk," she said quietly. We went into a small conference room. She pulled up the same email, turned her laptop toward me, and asked, "Do you know where these came from?" I choked. "They're fake. They're completely fake." That's not my body. She nodded slowly. We're not accusing you, but HR has to be involved. This kind of thing can't go unaddressed. I felt the room tilting. Everything went quiet in my head, except for this one screaming thought, who would do this to me? And then it hit me. There was only one person with access to my old photos. One person who'd always turned my pain into a joke. One person who had nothing better to do, Josh. And if I was right, this wasn't a prank, it was a full-blown character assassination. I couldn't stop shaking. HR pulled me into a separate room and asked if I had ever taken explicit photos or shared them online. I said no, firmly. They asked if I had an ex who might want revenge. I said no again. I felt like I was on trial for something I didn't even do. They told me they'd have to investigate. In the meantime, they asked for access to my work email, my laptop, and even my personal social media, just to rule everything out. I nodded, even though it felt invasive. I had nothing to hide, but I still felt exposed. After work, I sat in my car, staring blankly at the steering wheel. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I hadn't even cried yet. I was too numb, too humiliated. That night, I barely ate. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those images, not because I believed them, but because I couldn't stop imagining how other people would. My coworkers, my boss, strangers on the internet if this ever leaked, and beneath the fear, there was rage. Boiling, quiet, suffocating rage. I went over everything in my head. The email, the photo edits, the IP trace. There was no doubt this wasn't random. It was someone who had access to my older Facebook albums. Someone who knew my full name, where I worked, and how to hurt me. I remembered how Josh had hovered behind me that weekend while I worked. How he joked about me bossing people around. How smug he looked when I told him to leave me alone. I didn't have proof. Not yet, but my gut screamed his name. Still, some part of me hoped I was wrong. Because if it really was Josh, that meant my own brother had tried to destroy me. Not out of anger, but for fun. And if that was true, I had no idea how far he'd be willing to go. The next evening, I drove to my parents' house with my stomach twisted in knots. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe denial, maybe panic, but I needed to see his face when I asked. I needed confirmation, even if it came in the form of a smirk. Josh was on the couch, as usual. Hoodie chips, gaming headset half on. When he saw me walk in, he looked surprised, but not guilty. I sat down across from him, heart pounding. I need to ask you something, I said. He pulled off his headset. What? Did you send photos of me to my job? I watched him, closely. He blinked, looked confused for half a second. Then smirked. Oh, that. He leaned back. Relax, it was just a joke. I stared at him, stunned. My breath caught in my throat. A joke? You humiliated me at work. I could have lost my job, he shrugged. They weren't even real. It's not like you were naked for real. I thought it'd be funny to see if people fell for it. I felt dizzy, the casualness in his voice. The pride in his eyes. I stood up. You used my face, my name. That's not a joke. That's harassment, he scoffed. Jesus, calm down. You're acting like I killed someone. God, you're so dramatic. It was just a prank, I wanted to scream. To throw something. But all I could do was stare at this man, this child in a grown man's body, who thought he had the right to weaponize my body for amusement. I'm not joking. Josh, you crossed a line, I said, my voice flat. Cold. He grinned. Oh no, the Ice Queen's gonna report me? I walked out without another word, but in that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. He was never going to get away with it. Not this time. The next morning, I told my parents everything. Every vile detail. The fake photos, the email, how my job was now under investigation because of Josh's joke. I expected outrage. Maybe shock. Maybe even disappointment. Instead, my mom pressed a hand to her chest and sighed. Oh, honey. He didn't mean it like that. You know how Josh is? I blinked. He humiliated me in front of my employer. Dad didn't even look up from his phone. You've always been a bit sensitive, sweetheart. He was just being immature. Don't go blowing this out of proportion. Something inside me cracked. I laughed, half disbelief, half pain. Blowing it out of proportion? He could have ruined my career? Dad shrugged. And you'll ruin his life if you take this to the police. Think about that. He's your brother, my brother. The same brother who'd watched me cry as a kid and laughed harder. The same brother who'd sabotaged every success I'd ever had. They didn't see it. They never had. To them, he was the golden boy who just needed direction. I was the one who always took things too seriously. When I left that night, the house felt colder than I'd ever remembered. I sat in my car, hands shaking, staring at the front door, the home that was supposed to protect me, and I realized something brutal. They would never stand up for me. Not against him. Not ever. If I wanted justice, I'd have to get it myself. No one was coming to save me. I took a deep breath, wiped my tears, and whispered to myself, "Fine, then I'll handle it." Because this time, I wasn't going to be the family's punchline. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those images, felt the judgment in my boss's eyes, heard Josh's smug laugh. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I reached out to a lawyer friend, someone I trusted completely. As soon as I explained what happened, the doctored nudes, the email, the IP traces, he froze. Then he said the words that made my chest tighten with relief and rage all at once. "This is criminal. Identity fraud, digital harassment, defamation. You could press charges." I felt a flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could finally take this seriously. He walked me through the process, step by step, how to preserve evidence, how to trace the edits, how to make sure nothing was deleted or altered. He warned me it would be messy, that Josh might try to lie, and that my parents would probably be furious, but he also said one thing I'll never forget. You have a right to protect yourself. Don't let him get away with this. Ever. I spent the rest of the day compiling screenshots, downloading backups, noting IP addresses. Every detail mattered. Every tiny bit of evidence could be the difference between being dismissed as overreacting and finally holding him accountable. And as I worked, a strange feeling washed over me. Power. Not the arrogant, cruel power Josh always wielded to hurt me, but real power. Power that came from standing up for myself, from taking control. I knew this wouldn't be easy. I knew it would get uglier before it got better. But for the first time, I also knew I wasn't alone. I had the law, I had my evidence, and I had a chance to finally make him face what he'd done. The question wasn't whether I could fight this. It was whether I could survive the fallout. Because once the process started, there would be no turning back. A few tense days later, I got called into my boss's office. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she could hear it. Rachel looked at me with that measured, serious expression she always wears in meetings. "We've investigated the email and the images," she said. My stomach dropped. "They're fake, and we believe you didn't send them." Relief hit like a wave, but it was short-lived. "However," she continued, "because this caused disruption and rumors, we're going to give you a formal warning. Any further incidents could lead to termination." I blinked. Warning, not firing. I should have felt grateful. But all I felt was exposed, vulnerable. Every glance from a coworker felt loaded with suspicion. Every email notification made me flinch. Even though they believed me, the whispers were already spreading. Walking back to my desk, I tried to focus. I reviewed my slides for Monday's big pitch, tried to breathe, tried to act like this was normal, but nothing felt normal. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected the worst. Meanwhile, Josh was still at home, sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. I felt a tight, burning anger in my chest. He wasn't paying rent. He wasn't doing anything productive. And yet, somehow, he was still allowed to exist in our family without consequences. I clenched my fists under my desk. Something had to change. And deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be my parents helping him or the company protecting me. No. If this was going to end, I'd have to make sure he faced the consequences, and I knew exactly how to start. I woke up to the sound of pounding, real, urgent pounding on our front door. For a second, my brain scrambled through 100 possibilities: a package, a neighbor, a delivery. Then my chest tightened when I saw Dad open the door and 2 officers step into the hallway like they owned the place. They asked for Josh. My stomach lurched. I walked into the living room as casually as I could, but my hands were cold and my throat felt raw. One of the officers, mid-40s, tired eyes, showed my dad a warrant and said, We need to seize a few electronic devices related to an ongoing investigation. My dad stammered. My mom began to cry softly. Josh was still in his hoodie, hair a mess, eyes bloodshot like he'd been gaming through the night. For a split second, he looked like the same smug teenager I'd grow up with. Then reality hit him like a truck. They sat him down at the kitchen table and asked him a few routine questions while another officer carefully unplugged his desktop and packed his laptop into evidence bags. I watched him go pale. The bravado had drained away. He kept repeating, "It's a prank. It was just a prank." There was a hollowness to the words that made my skin crawl. Later, in a sterile conference room at the station, the lead detective pulled up a forensic report. He scrolled through logs and metadata like a teacher exposing a cheat sheet. "The edits originated from this machine," he said, pointing to a file path. He clicked into a folder named, ridiculously, memes. There it was. Copies of the doctored images, timestamps, and a sloppy note file where Josh had written, "Try on boss," and a list of target emails. I felt my knees go weak. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt a cold, dizzy sort of sorrow. This whole time, the cruelty had been cataloged on his hard drive like trophies. Josh's shoulders sank. He kept whispering, "Please don't let this ruin me." And for the first time, I watched fear replace arrogance on his face. But the worst part, the part that settled in my chest like a stone, was what my parents did next. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within hours of the police leaving, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Mom cornered me in the kitchen, red-eyed and shaking. "How could you do this to your own brother?" she hissed. "You know he's fragile. You're ruining his life over a stupid mistake." Dad didn't yell, but his words were heavier. "This is family. You don't drag family into court. You fix things at home." I stared at him in disbelief. He tried to destroy my career. I could have lost everything because of his mistake. Why is this on me? But they wouldn't listen. They saw a daughter who betrayed blood, not a sister who finally drew a line. By that night, the family WhatsApp group was a nightmare. Dozens of messages from aunts and uncles. "He's just a boy, Beta. Work it out. Family first. Forgive and move on. Don't make this public. Think of your parents' reputation." It was like they were all reading from the same script, one that had been written long before I was old enough to challenge it. I became the villain overnight, the cold, heartless sister who'd thrown her own brother to the wolves. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. The walls felt like they were pressing in, every room thick with blame. So I packed a single bag and left, crashing on my best friend's couch with a numb, heavy ache inside me. Every night that week, I cried into a pillow, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Was I really the monster they said I was? Should I have kept quiet, protected Josh, even when he'd never protected me? But just as guilt threatened to break me, something happened. Something that made it clear I'd been right to stand my ground, and it changed everything. A week before the court date, just when I thought the worst was behind me, I got a call from the detective on my case. His tone was different, sharper, almost wary. "We received a new email," he said, "from an anonymous account claiming you doctored the photos and sent them to yourself for attention." For a moment, my blood ran cold. I could hear my own pulse pounding. Was this really happening? I asked him to forward the email. The words were a twisted mockery of my voice. Whoever wrote it tried to sound desperate, attention-hungry, unstable. "My family is jealous of me. I wanted to get my brother in trouble. I did it all myself." It made my skin crawl. I barely had time to process before the detective added, "Don't worry. Whoever sent this was sloppy. The email metadata traced back to your brother's old phone. It wasn't even wiped properly." He almost sounded amused by how amateur it was. That's when it hit me. Josh hadn't learned a thing. Even with the police involved, with our parents begging and relatives circling, he couldn't stop. He would rather burn the house down than admit what he did. He was willing to drag me lower, humiliate me further, just to avoid facing consequences. My lawyer was furious. "This only strengthens your case," he said, eyes blazing. "It shows a pattern, malicious intent. He's desperate. And now, you have more proof than ever." That night, staring at the ceiling in my friend's guest room, I finally stopped doubting myself. All those years of being called dramatic, too sensitive, overreacting, gone. This wasn't my fault. I wasn't the villain. If anything, I'd been too forgiving, and as court day crept closer, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not guilt, but resolve. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about reclaiming my story. The day of the hearing, I woke before dawn, my stomach a hollow pit. I pulled on my best suit, smoothing invisible wrinkles with shaking hands. My friend hugged me at the door. "You can do this," she whispered. I nodded, barely believing it myself. Court was nothing like TV. No drama, no shouting, just dull walls, low voices, and paperwork. Josh sat across the aisle in a wrinkled dress shirt, hair unbrushed, eyes fixed on the floor. For once, he wasn't the center of attention. He didn't crack a joke, didn't roll his eyes, didn't even look at me. The judge read out the charges: digital harassment, identity fraud, defamation. I heard each word like a bell. Josh barely spoke, only muttered guilty to avoid a trial. His lawyer begged for leniency. "He's young, Your Honor. It was a mistake. He's never done anything like this before." But the evidence was overwhelming. The edits, the emails, the sloppy attempts to frame me. The judge's face was stern but not unkind. "You have a lot of growing up to do, Mr. Summers. Actions have consequences." Josh was sentenced to mandatory therapy, a heavy fine, and worst of all for him, a permanent criminal record. No jail, but the shame was enough. He kept glancing back at our parents as if hoping for rescue, but they just stared straight ahead, pale and silent. As I walked out, the weight on my chest finally started to lift. I felt shaky and hollow, but I also felt something fierce blooming inside. Relief, yes, but also a pride I'd never known before. For the first time, it was over. He couldn't hurt me like this ever again. But the story wasn't done, not for him and not for me. In the weeks after the verdict, the ripples kept spreading. Josh's life changed overnight. The job offer he'd been bragging about? Gone the minute HR ran his background check. The grad school he wanted to attend withdrew his acceptance. Even some of his old friends, guys who used to laugh along at his pranks, stopped returning his calls. He texted me once, "You ruined my life. Hope you're happy." I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't reply. What was there left to say? Meanwhile, something strange happened at work. My boss pulled me aside, told me she admired the way I handled everything. I was promoted to lead a new project. My team, the same people whose whispers I'd dreaded, started coming to me for advice. The storm had passed, and somehow I was still standing. Therapy helped me unpack the hurt I'd spent a lifetime swallowing. Not just from Josh, but from a family that made me the scapegoat for his mistakes. I started sleeping better. I began to believe I deserved good things: peace, respect, safety. Still, family gatherings were tense and awkward. My parents barely spoke to me, only ever mentioning how hard this has been for your brother. But I no longer flinched at their silence. I started building a life outside those walls, a real life, with friends who showed up and colleagues who valued me for who I was. For the first time, I felt something that had always seemed out of reach: freedom. And with every day that passed, the guilt faded a little more, replaced by the simple, stubborn truth: I had done the right thing, but closure wasn't something Josh was ready to let me have. A few months after the trial, I got an email from Josh. The subject line was apology, but when I opened it, I saw he'd CC'd our entire extended family. The message was long, full of flowery, hollow words. "I'm deeply sorry for the pain I caused my sister and our family. I never meant real harm. I was in a dark place. I take full responsibility for my actions." There were lines about regret, promises to change, and appeals for forgiveness. He even wrote, "I hope we can all move forward as a family." My phone started pinging within minutes. Aunts and uncles replied with hearts and prayers. "Family is everything. So brave of you to apologize. Beta. You two should sit down and heal." But the whole thing felt staged, like he was putting on a show for damage control, not actually making amends. There was no direct message to me, no real ownership. Not a single word about the years he'd spent tearing me down, not just the final unforgivable act. I showed the email to my therapist, who just raised an eyebrow and asked, "How do you feel?" I sat with it. I realized I didn't feel angry or vindicated or even sad anymore. I felt tired. I didn't reply, because closure, I'd learned, isn't something you wait for from other people. It's something you create for yourself. That night, I deleted the message and went for a walk. No destination, no phone, just my own breath in the quiet air. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't care who believed what. I was finally free from his story, but my parents still couldn't let go, and neither could the past. Even after everything, court, consequences, Josh's apology blast, my parents never really forgave me. I could feel it in every cold greeting at family dinners, every pointed silence when someone mentioned the case. If I tried to talk about work or my new apartment, Mom would just change the subject. Dad kept his eyes on the TV. The worst was when extended family visited. They'd pull me aside with awkward hugs and whispers. "You did what you thought was best, but couldn't you have found another way? Family is all we have. Maybe try reaching out?" They never asked what Josh did. They just wanted things back the way they were. Me silent, Josh untouchable. But I couldn't be that person anymore. I'd spent a lifetime twisting myself into whatever shape would make them comfortable. Smiling when I wanted to scream, apologizing when I was the one bleeding. I finally understood that their approval was just another cage, so I stopped chasing it. I poured myself into work and friendships, into small joys and hard-won peace. I found people who laughed with me, not at me. Who believed me without proof or apology. Family events stayed awkward. Group chats were ghost towns. Sometimes late at night, I'd scroll through old photos and wonder if I could have done it differently. But every time guilt crept in, I remembered the humiliation, the loneliness. The years I'd spent shrinking to fit their idea of family. Now, I live for myself, not their comfort, not their forgiveness. I'm not the villain in my story, even if that's the role they've chosen for me, and for the first time, that's enough. But I knew my story wasn't over, because healing isn't a finish line. It's a choice you make over and over again. People sometimes ask if I regret it, pressing charges, breaking the family code, choosing myself over keeping the peace. But the truth is, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about ruining Josh's life or tearing apart my family. It was about reclaiming my name, my dignity, my right to be safe, even from the people who were supposed to protect me. For years, I'd let their comfort matter more than my own sanity. I'd bitten my tongue until it bled, convinced myself that if I was quieter, smaller, easier to love, they'd finally see me. But silence is a slow kind of death. It eats away at you in the empty spaces between laughter and small talk. It teaches you to doubt your own pain, to apologize for the bruises you can't show. I'm done apologizing. I don't hate Josh. Honestly, I hope he learns and grows. I hope my parents realize that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's control. But I can't make them see what they refuse to see. All I can do is live my own truth, loud and unashamed. My life is quieter now, but it's mine. I still have nightmares sometimes, but I also have mornings where I wake up and don't dread the day ahead. I have friends who show up, work that fulfills me, and, finally, a sense of peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. So, no. I don't regret it. I wish I'd done it sooner. And if anyone reading this is standing on the edge, wondering if it's worth the fallout to finally stand up for yourself, let me say this. Silence cost more than speaking up ever will. I chose myself, and for the first time in my life, that was enough.